Hello, class members. This is Mrs. Cotter again, talking to you a little bit about Chapter 2. And yes, I am eating a candy cane. I'm going to suggest to you that before you start this chapter, listening to this YouTube, that you go out and you find a Tootsie Roll Pop, a sucker, a piece of candy cane, something that you can use to be touching some different areas within your mouth. So you can stop this and go do that and have it in mind. I'm going to put mine down for right now. That's good. I wanted to talk a little bit about this chapter because it is wholly anatomy and physiology. All of the structures that we use for producing the mechanics of speech are here in this chapter. And anatomy are the different organs or parts of the system that we use, and the physiology is how they work together, or what is the function of each of these articulators. Of course, we have lots of different systems that are working together to be able to synchronize all of these different aspects to mechanical speech. And I'm saying the word mechanical speech because lots of times people think language is speech and they think speech is language, but they're really two very separate things. And right now we're talking about mechanics, the parts to the system and how they work together to produce the message. Of course, the brain is very, very big in this whole system because it controls everything. And I wanted to say that if you're reading the text and you're looking at this and you don't still have a good picture of the brain, I would suggest that you go to the images on Google and find a couple of pictures that work for you. Maybe some that are color-coded that you can use, pardon me, when you are trying to take a look at things. And ones that really help you see the different lobes of the brain and the different parts of the brain so that you can have a good idea, because each one of them has a very specific function when it comes to producing speech. I don't have time to look at all of those right here because that's for your reading to do, but I have a couple of ones I want to talk about. The frontal lobe, I want to be sure that we just discuss a little bit because it is huge in this production. We as human beings communicate. It's a miracle that we communicate, but we do. Think of all of the great writers, the great musicians that are always sending a message, and we're interpreting that message, and hopefully we're interpreting it the way that the person who was sending it wanted it to be interpreted. The frontal lobe of the brain has a lot to do with that. And if you look here in the second one, it says it has a role in motor planning. Motor planning is once the brain learns how to do something, it does it in such a quick succession, we don't have to think about it. I don't have to think about how to tie a shoe. I don't even have to look at how to tie the shoe. I can be talking to somebody else and tying a shoe at the same time. It wasn't always that way. If you go and you work with little children and you see the amount of time it takes to learn to do all of that motor activity, you'll think to yourself, holy smokes, that's a lot. I don't even remember learning to tie a shoe. But the brain has a lot to do with that motor planning. It comes into the production of speech in the fact that once we learn to say a word, lots of times we don't have to practice again. So here's a word for you. Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. I know how to say that. Do you know how to say that? You probably do if you ever saw Mary Poppins. I don't even have to think about it. If I see it, if I hear it, if someone's singing the song, I can do supercalifragilisticexpialidocious without even thinking. That's motor planning. The other thing that the frontal lobe has a lot to do with is executive functioning. That's a term that you will hear a lot these days and more as time goes on, because executive functioning executive functioning sometimes is impacted by concussion. And executive functioning is the highest order of thinking that we do as human beings. That's solving world problems. That's physics. That's the idea of thinking way outside of the box and being able to use the skills that we have to think new thoughts that someone's never thought before. It's also being able to organize our own thoughts. So that frontal lobe is extremely important. The other ones are too, and you can read here. The temporal lobe on your left side of your temporal lobe, it's right about here. There are two areas there, Broca and Wernicke. Broca is the movements for speech, and Wernicke's is the language area. And boy, we will talk much more about them as the semester goes on. Okay. So what does this mean for us? It really means that we will be getting through all of these different systems. Respiratory, which is your breathing, laryngeal, which is your vocal folds and your cartilages, and articulation system, which are what we're going to talk about right now. All these things have to come together to get to speech. Just a real quick note about these things. As the air comes into our lungs, it goes through our vocal folds, is manipulated by our articulators. There are 3 sounds that come through our nose. So if you think about it, they sound a little bit differently. And let me just say those to you. Mm, and So mom, night, and sing. Those, if you try to block your nose, you can't make them because the air flows through them. All of our other sounds come through our oral cavity. So you can tell a person has a cold, probably because of their red nose, but also because they're not saying and So a little kid comes up, he's got a cold in his nose, he goes, he can't hardly get that out because he can't get the air to go through. So what I wanted to do with that lollipop or candy cane or whatever is just touch our little articulators here and talk a bit about them. If you see, I'm going to move my picture a little bit. There we go. If we're talking about breathing and using our articulators for the mechanics of speech, if you'll just take a look there, you'll see the nasal cavity, you'll see the nostril, then you'll see the lip, the tongue, and the teeth. So air is coming into our body either through our nose or through our mouth, and we talk on the exhalation of speech. So let's just take a look. Here's our tongue of that candy cane. Here's our teeth all the way back. And if you don't have your teeth, that little glitch was my dog running into the room, and I've gotten him out now, so we'll go ahead. Okay, so we have the tongue, we have the lips, we have the teeth, and teeth are important because you need teeth to be able to say some of your sounds. If you go back farther, right behind the teeth is a bony kind of ridge called the alveolar ridge. If you go back just a little bit farther, it kind of goes back up. That's called your hard palate. And be careful now, but try it. If you can, take your candy cane or your lollipop and go slowly back until you feel something soft at the top of your mouth. Oh yeah, there it is. That's called the soft palate or the velum. It has the ability to move up and back. And why that's important is because if you look at your diaphragm here, you'll see it says the lip, and then over to the left it says soft palate. That soft palate has to go up and back to close off the nasal passage so that when we're eating, food goes down our esophagus to our stomach and not our trachea. So if you remember from grade school anatomy, the trachea goes from the mouth into our lungs, and the esophagus is usually closed unless we're eating and swallowing. Then when the soft palate goes up and back, it pulls the esophagus open and food goes down to our stomach. This seems like a simple thing, now. If you're taking a bite while you're watching this, you'll know that you're kind of chewing on your sucker or your candy cane, and so you just swallow. Wow, that seems easy. It isn't. So if you have a second, you can get a glass of water, or for my sake, a glass of tea. Let's take a drink. If you can, in the midst of your drink, as you go to swallow, if you could just hold it for a second, you will feel your velum go up and back so that then you can swallow and it goes down to your esophagus, which is great because then it goes to your stomach. The problem comes in when there is a person who has possibly had a stroke. They're suffering with muscular dystrophy, ALS, a paralyzed vocal fold. There's just a ton of things that we'll talk about as we go along in the course that can happen to any part of that system that can make it very difficult to swallow, to breathe, and also to produce speech. So I just wanted to take a second there to take a look at those articulators. And really, I'm going to encourage you to take that lollipop or whatever and do that little, demonstration, and then also the tea. In fact, I'm going to do that one more time. I'm going to try to hold that swallow in the midst of it. Oh, and then I can feel it go down my throat. So something funny to kind of think about, because I know it's happened to all of us, is what happens when you start to laugh, you're drinking or eating, you're with some friends, and something happens. What could that be? Yes, that's when the soda comes through your nose. Why does that happen? Well, let's go back. If you think about taking a drink and the soft palate needs to go up, but you've been drinking and you're talking and you're laughing and you're trying to do all those things at once, the body gets a little confused. Up and back, open, swallow is in, laughing is out. What should I do? If that's not in a very coordinated effort, then sometimes the soda goes down the lungs instead of down the esophagus. And yes, that has happened to all of us. And now you know why. So I hope that this was helpful for you when you're taking a look at Chapter 2. Please be sure that you answer your questions and do your work for this week. And if you have any questions, please let me know. Have a good evening.